wine industry's been around forever. It's one of the oldest physical CPG products in human history. And while it's easy to say as a founder and of a venture backed company, like we're disruptors, we're going in to break up this antiquated old industry. The reality is that the wine industry has actually done a pretty good job of modernizing their business. The first ever subscription business was a wine subscription. It was wineries started that before all the other direct consumer subscriptions, started to skyrocket in the late 2000s. Wine had been doing it since the 70s. So they'd already done the subscription model. They've done the owned retail model of opening up these tasting rooms. So now you'll see articles about Allbirds and Warby Parker going from direct consumer to omni-channel. Wine's been omni-channel forever.
You're listening to Prospecting on Purpose, where we discuss all things prospecting, sales, business, and mindset. I'm your host, Sara Murray, a sales champion who's here to show you that you can be a shark in business and still lead with intentionality and authenticity. Tune in each week as we dive into methods to connect with clients, communicate with confidence, and close the deal. Joe Welch is the CEO and co-founder of In Good Taste. In Good Taste is a wine company that creates direct-to-consumer, ready-to-drink wine flights in gorgeous 6-ounce bottles. You're really able to sip your way through wine country. In Good Taste was founded in 2017 and has recently been featured in the Today Show and the Wall Street Journal. I am a huge fan of In Good Taste, from the product quality to the packaging and branding. I love the wine flight concept because it enables you to try wines that you normally would have otherwise avoided. For example, I've always been someone who really hated Riesling, so I thought, and the In Good Taste wine flight had a dry Riesling, which was delightful. And so now I embrace it, and I just think it's so great that they're really removing any barriers to entry. Our discussion today is essentially how Joe and his team have used their entrepreneurial spirit and backgrounds to approach and innovate one of the world's oldest industries. It's going to be a great discussion, and I am so excited to have Joe on the podcast today. So, welcome to the show, Joe.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited too. And I think, we chatted a little bit before we started about where we want to take this conversation. But first, I need to ask you, what is the most underrated wine and why?
You're actually starting with a harder question because most wine is vastly overrated versus underrated. So I had to think about that.
Okay, we can ask that question. What's the most overrated one?
Overrated wines are going to be anything that's between $50 and $75 in a grocery store. There's really no reason to price a bottle between $50 and $75. It doesn't cost that much more. It's generally considered kind of the dead zone of wine, where you're not a super luxury wine that's been aged for 6-7 years, and you're not, an affordable premium wine between $20 and $30. Personally, I think that the Prisoner is probably the most overrated wine that's readily available. It used to be a spectacular red blend and a really good value at around $35 a bottle. It's since been purchased several times. The winemaker who originally came up with the blend has left, and the quality has definitely been deteriorated over time. So I'd say that's the most overrated. In terms of underrated, though, I gotta give a shout out to Merlot, because Merlot's had a really rough go of things ever since Paul Giamatti decided to just destroy that entire industry and sideways. But it's a really good alternative to Cabernet Sauvignon, especially if you want something a little lighter, a lot cheaper, and are still trying to pair with like a heavier meat or something with a lot of fat. Merlot is going to be really delicious. You can get tons of great value right now. And I would go Napa Merlot any day of the week.
Okay. Oh man, learning already. And I feel like I agree with you. That comment in Sideways just shows you the power of Hollywood, really.
It does. It does. Wine doesn't feature very heavily in pop culture, at least, the education of wine or specifics of wine. There's very few movies that are purely dedicated to wine. We've seen some more in sort of recent days, but every time one comes out, it does shake the industry a little bit, especially when it gains sort of that mass market appeal.
Oh, I've never thought about that. You're right. Well, we're going to tackle Hollywood with this podcast episode. Go try Merlot. So would you put Merlot in one of your top 3 wines? Like, what would your top 3 be?
If I had to choose grape varietals, I wouldn't put Merlot in my top 3. for just pure grape varietals, you've got to go with Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Sauvignon Blanc. To get a little bit more specific, though, like I guess my three that I'm drinking right now would be the Sasso Ferrato 2018 Sangiovese. It's a producer up in Healdsburg named Matt Smith out of Grapeseed Wine Fund. He makes an excellent Sangiovese from Sonoma. And then I would also throw a shout out to Sunstone Winery, which is actually where we got our start way back in 2017, back when we were called Taste It Wines. They made a rosé of Merlot. So I guess Merlot does make it onto the top three just in rosé form. And I'd never seen a wine, specifically, I'd never seen a rosé that had such a nice ruby crimson color and a lot of complexity and depth versus just being light and refreshing. It felt like it was more of a red wine than a rosé, but really fun. And then finally, I'm a sucker for Italian wines. So anything out of the Barolo region is going to be fantastic for me. Paolo Manzoni is a great producer over there. He's got a wine actually called Louvis, which is a 2016 blend of all the different varietals that he plants. He dedicates it to his wife every vintage. He buys a piece of artwork, puts it on the label, and they're just a really adorable couple that makes really spectacular wine.
Oh my goodness. You can really tell like your passion and knowledge coming through on in these questions. It's kind of making me thirsty.
It's a fun hobby. It's a fun hobby.
Right. No kidding. So let's talk about, how did you turn your hobby into your whole career? Because you started in the tech space when you graduated college, correct?
Correct. Yeah. I graduated college and thought that I had to take either one of two paths. Either you go into banking or you go into tech. That's generally what happens in the Bay Area. I decided to go the tech route and started off joining the mid-market sales team at Twitter. And so, I knew a lot about wine. I come from a family of winemakers. My grandfather and my dad have been making wine in bathtubs and basements for generations, but I never knew you could actually turn it into a career. And so, not knowing that, I went straight into sales because it's the best place to really start a career and learn a lot about yourself. And my thought process was no matter what I end up doing long term, if I know how to sell, it's going to be a lot easier to do whatever I want. Because whether you're a CEO, whether you're a head of marketing, whether you're a lawyer or even a doctor, a lot of your job is convincing other people that your perspective and your knowledge base is the correct one, which all comes back to sales. So I started there, and it was a really exciting time at Twitter. It was right after they had IPO'd. They had taken some of the best talent away from Apple and Google and Facebook, and we were flying high, slinging digital ads. And while I loved it, I didn't want to get fully pigeonholed into digital ad sales for my career. So I was very fortunate after about 2 years to have the opportunity to join DoorDash back when they were a pretty small team. I was employee number 23 there. And they had an opening on their launch team, which for anybody who's coming out of college or who's thinking about making a career change, if you find the opportunity to be a city launcher for a company, do it. It's the coolest job I've ever had, including being CEO. You basically get to go into a city and set up all the operations for that company in that city. You are a mini CEO, a mini founder, where somebody else has made the product for you, but you figure out how to roll up your sleeves and get the job done. So anything from, our job was anywhere from hiring and training the local drivers to mapping out the delivery zones within a city and studying traffic flows to understand which restaurants could deliver to which customers, and then to selling the initial partners to be on the platform. So we'd go door to door and try and sell as many restaurants as possible on a commission model. This was, way back in 2015 when on-demand food delivery was not big, and so it was a very hard sell. Everyone was very skeptical of the whole process, and took a long time. But you do that in a city for 3 or 4 months, it gets up and running, and then you move on to the next city and you get to try again. So you really get to learn from your mistakes in a confined setting that's truly unique. So that was a lot of fun. And as that company decided to grow or continue to grow, I sort of outgrew the role there, and we had launched all the major cities in the United States. So I went back to think about, again, my career trajectory and where I wanted to end up. And I had now been privy to seeing how a smaller venture-backed business really operates, and knew that I wanted to stay in sort of small businesses eventually. But the one part of the skill set that I didn't have, that I thought I'd need in order to be an executive at a early stage company, was managing a budget or managing a P&L. I'd never really, managed a lot of money as part of any of my roles. And so I took a job at SpaceX on their procurement team, essentially being on the flip side of sales and being on the buying side, for all non-flight IT purchases for the company. So it was about a $50 billion a year budget, and the whole goal was to buy everything that you needed to buy for under $50 million, which is a really cool perspective, being on the buying side after coming from the selling side and getting sold to by software sales reps versus being a software sales rep, and taught me a lot there. But I had spent about 6-7 years in tech and had built up this skill set with a lot of really incredible companies, and thought it was time to go out and do something on my own. And so I stepped away from SpaceX and didn't have a job lined up. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. Tried to learn to surf, was terrible at surfing, so I figured I'd better figure out a job or a career pretty quickly. And was really fortunate to spend a week up in Napa with a couple close friends of mine to celebrate one of them changing careers. And while we were up there, we were all big wine enthusiasts, but didn't really know anything about wine. We were, faking it till we make it. So we would buy the expensive bottle and pretend like we knew why we bought the expensive bottle. We had a really cool opportunity to do a wine tasting with a woman named Karen McNeil, who is one of the all-time greatest wine authors of our generation. She wrote the Wine Bible, which every sommelier owns, and she was able to pair wines in a really interesting way that, as a consumer, I had never experienced before. And it seemed so simple. And what she did was, because she wasn't a winery, she could go out and buy whatever bottles of wine she wanted in order to create a tasting experience where you learn something. So she would buy a oaked Chardonnay and an unoaked Chardonnay, and you could taste those two things next to each other. And she said, that's the oak that you're tasting, or that's the malolactic fermentation that's going through. And that was really an aha moment for me, where I finally started to understand what some of these terms like tannins meant, or fermentation, different fermentation techniques. And when I came back to Los Angeles, I was just absolutely obsessed with the experience. It was so simple that it was shocking that, being in a big city with lots of wine, I wasn't able to replicate that experience. And that was really the catalyst for starting to research more wine as a career versus just a hobby. And it kind of spiraled from there. So at first you're just curious and you start doing some Google searches, and then you realize that wine's a $72 billion industry. And I had never realized how big of a business wine really was. I thought it was just something that, like, my parents, they made in their basement and they just kind of sold to people. But realizing how big of an industry it was, how big of an opportunity there potentially was, and stumbling upon this way of learning or this way of gaining confidence in wine, I thought, there's something here. Let's really devote some time to this and see if there's a business model we can make work.
Wow, that's so cool. So you can already kind of see the pieces formulating between your tech background, Karen, your guru. I don't know what we want to call Karen, but that's so clever. So what was your first step? I mean, when you kind of started to think about how could you build this into something that makes you money and is a sustainable business, what was your first step?
Well, my first step actually almost made us into a business that perpetually would lose money. Initially, I wanted to actually create a TV show. I wanted to make a chef's table of wine where you bottled samples from the winery that the camera crew is visiting, and people could drink along with the TV show. There was a lot of problems with that business model. One, TV shows are terrible business models. As for a startup, they're great if you are in the entertainment industry and that's your profession, but to base a company around that is not a great idea. And so I was very fortunate that a friend of mine who worked for Anheuser-Busch, actually, I was spitballing the idea to her, and she said, hate your idea for the TV show, but mini bottles and samples, that's interesting. You should look into that a little bit more. And that whole kind of concept for mini bottles came as a result of what we were actually talking about with entertainment and wine. There are not a lot of TV shows about wine. There's not a lot of movies about wine because it's not a very visceral product. A glass of $2,000 a bottle Chateauneuf de Pop is going to look the exact same as a glass of $2 Chuck. So when you're watching at home, you can't really empathize with what the som or the host is drinking on TV. And even though, really, expert soms will walk you through the flavors and the profiles, it's hard for us to understand. It's hard for us to connect to versus food, where we all know what chicken tastes like. So, it looks delicious and we've got a reference point for it. So the samples were to try and give the consumer a reference point. And when I started looking more into that, I realized that the sample and the format was actually going to be a kind of our differentiating factor in entering the market, because there was a one size fits all solution for wine. You could only buy full bottles. And it was just the beginning of the canned wine movement, which is still trying to grow. But we realized very early on that because wine has this pomp and circumstance about it, because it's got this, price equals quality, association, almost this luxury association, you had to play into customers' preconceived notions of wine. And if we were going to shrink the packaging, we had to shrink it in a way that was going to look luxurious, that was going to feel quality, and then back that up with amazing wine and amazing juice. And so that's what led us to designing our bottle from scratch. And we were, literally going down the aisles of Whole Foods, picking out olive oil bottles, different vinegar bottles, and taking a Dremel saw and cutting off the tops and trying to shape it into a way that, we thought looked good. And finally it landed on the shape that it is now.
I love it. I think it would, because I think when people think, shrinking or sample size, you think of like the airplane bottles with the plastic screw top. This is such a quality, like it screams luxury, but to me, it's also like accessible
Yeah.
luxury. Like, this is something that I'm not intimidated by. And I'd be curious to understand kind of when you brought it to market, like, what did that look like? Who was the first customer? What was the feedback?
So the first customers that we really brought to market was direct to consumer. It was our friends and our family, and we just wanted to see if people liked the format, or if they liked the wine at all. And so the feedback was overwhelmingly positive from a wine standpoint and from a format standpoint. And we were really proud of that, because a bottle looks simple, but there's a lot of decisions that go into that, from the size of the label to the artwork to using natural cork, which nobody had ever done in a small format, but it still gives you that pop that you expect when you open up a full bottle of wine. To the wooden bar top being biodegradable and fully recyclable. Every single step took a long time. And so when we got the feedback that people loved the form factor, it was really, really encouraging. At the time, it was a monthly subscription that was sending you 8 mini bottles a month. And the negative feedback that we got was, this is too much wine. I don't need this many, glasses of wine a month sent to me. I can't drink them all fast enough. And that's a problem that every winery that runs a subscription model deals with.
Mm.
We decided to pivot very quickly, though, and we realized that, e-commerce and online, again, this is back in 2017, e-commerce and online was going to be expensive. We didn't have deep pockets. We hadn't raised a lot of money. We wanted to create a base of business that we could depend on, and where we thought we had a competitive advantage was going to be hotels. So we sort of shifted the business model away from e-commerce and started going door to door selling to hotels to get into mini bars, into their grab and go markets, where, situations where people want one glass of wine, they're only there for a night. They don't want the full bottle and they've got to leave the next day. It's either going to get wasted or they're going to drink too much. And so my co-founder and I split up the city of Santa Monica and started going door to door. And that was really the only way to learn how to start selling, is just by trying.
Hmm.
Um, and it's scary because you don't want to mess up a potentially big account, but you also don't know what the big accounts are. So we thought that, hotels like Shutters on the Beach, or the higher 5-star end resorts were going to be the end all be all hotels. We wanted those cool, sexy hotels. Turns out the hotel that did the most volume for us was actually the first hotel we ever signed, which was the Hilton LAX.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because if you're staying at the Hilton LAX, your flight's canceled, you're pissed off, you want to drink, and you're only there one night. And they turn over thousands of people a day. So you get all of the traffic of a grocery store, but with way less competition. And it's those insights that you just really can't fully flesh out and predict when you're starting. So you really just have to hit the pavement and hope for the best and check in with people so you can learn when you do find an insight and replicate it. And now, we know to target places like airport hotels, or really corporate hotels that cater to a large corporate audience.
That's so interesting to me because I have a hospitality background and I would have never thought that the Hilton LAX would be numero uno, and it makes a lot of sense
Mhm.
when you break it down like that. The traffic of a grocery store, I love it.
The only other one that ever came close to it was in the summers. Yosemite Lodge
Oh,
moved like 12 or 15 units a day because it's the only hotel in Yosemite. It's the only place to buy alcohol in the entire park. So you get a huge advantage of being in a place like that versus again being on a Whole Foods where you're one of 400.
right. And I think that comes back to accessible luxury because if you just
Yeah,
targeted the luxury hotels, you missed a whole opportunity with the Hilton LAX from a volume standpoint. So that's really clever.
yeah.
And I also want to talk about your comment on like the wine member subscription because I think, I've been wine tasting. I live in California too. Like I've been to the different wine regions and they totally get you to sign up as a member and you get your bottles. So that seems like the industry's way of operating for a long time. So between the bottle sizes and then between kind of your go to market and changing that subscription service, like those are two ways that you're innovating the industry. What came next? I mean, you're selling to hotels. What happens next?
So ironically, we went against innovation next because COVID hit in 2020, and all of a sudden, being in the hotel and hospitality industry was not the place you wanted to be. So we had thankfully, during this time as we were growing in hotels, been able to raise a little bit of money. And when they stopped picking up the phones, when our sales reps couldn't go door to door anymore, and when we started getting emails saying, "Hey, I've been furloughed," we realized, how big of a problem this was going to be, and the only way we were going to be able to sell wine was going to be online and direct to consumer. And so we relaunched our website, but we had learned from the first time. So instead of just launching a subscription like everybody else, we allowed for one-off purchases. That was all we sold. You could just buy a kit. There was no subscription. There still is no subscription. You could just buy whatever you wanted. And we tried to make it as experiential as possible. So we released our first collection and our still best-selling collection, which is our California wine mixer. It's a collection of 8 different wines from up and down the coast of California, and it helps you. It's a really good introductory journey to wine that'll give you a lot of staples and contain some very representative wines for what a Napa Cab should be, or what a traditional San Ynez Valley Pinot Noir tastes like. So it's going to cover the big ones, and then we're also going to throw in one or two wines that are a little off the beaten path, whether it's a Mendocino Syrah, or a Sonoma Sangiovese. We've get you out of your comfort zone a little bit. And so we launched that in March of 2020, and it really just exploded. One of the things that really helped with that was we were probably the first mover into virtual wine tastings. And we also had the best product for virtual wine tastings. All of our competitors were shipping each individual 4 full bottles, and it cost $150 or $120. And you had to open 4 bottles that are then going to sit in your fridge and go bad, versus In Good Taste, being small format first, was able to send you 8 glasses of wine, a better tasting experience, all for $65. And we would throw the tasting experience in for free, so long as you had a group of 7 or more. And so you could get your friends together. And for the first couple of months, it was me and my co-founder just hosting 4 or 5 wine tastings a day. And then finally, our livers said, "Please stop." And we brought on and hired somms and really just wine enthusiasts, people who knew about wine as a hobby and wanted to learn a little bit more, but were a lot of fun to grab a drink with. And they ended up being really the backbone of the company and the tasting hosts, as we continue to scale throughout 2020.
I mean, talk about being at the right place at the right time. You guys were so well positioned for the pandemic. People drank a lot. And when I think about how I use the kit from a sales perspective, I like it because it's super approachable. And if you're a sales rep listening and you're trying to think of something creative to do with your clients that they will say yes to, this is such a killer way to get in with people in a non-salesy way to bond, but really bring in that experience. Did you see a lot of shifts from corporate events and company outings? When did that shift happen during the pandemic?
Almost right away. Really almost right away. And it still continues to this day. So during the pandemic, about 50% of our tastings were corporate tastings, and 50% were friends and family just reconnecting with each other. But we really found strong product market fit with corporations because, to your point, it's an icebreaker. It's an immediate icebreaker. It's less awkward than trying to take a client to drinks because you've got kind of a mediator there who can make it fun and exciting. And we would tailor each experience so that if you wanted to go run through a full presentation during the wine tasting, we could do that. So we would, only talk about three of the wines, then have a chat open so that if people had questions about the other ones, they could ask the somm while people are reading through, their presentation. And the clients that we had saw really strong results, and so we actually started building out an inside sales team that we still have today, a team of about four, which purely targets corporations and helps them, whether it's from prospecting calls and prospecting opportunities, all the way to corporate gifts, thank yous at the end of the year. Little bonuses if you close a house. We have a lot of realtors who use our product as a congratulations, and it's really just a fun way to connect. And what makes it a lot easier than just going out and buying a bottle of wine for somebody or sending them a bottle of champagne is, A, it's unique, but B, you don't need to know what kind of wine that person likes to drink.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't just guess based off of label and price point. You're sending them 6 different wines, 8 different wines. They're probably going to like a couple of them. And if they don't like a wine, that's completely fine. We don't expect all of our customers to like all of our wines. The point is to learn what you like and what you don't like. And it's just as important to know what you don't like. And if you have to pour a little down the drain, you're not pouring a full bottle down the drain. You're pouring half of a glass down the drain. So it's a lot less waste and again, a lot more casual than what wine has been previously.
That's such a good point. I would host wine and cheese events over the years of my different sales roles, and something that should be fun, like buying wine with a corporate card that's not my money, stressed me out so much because I'm like, I don't know what people like. I don't know if this is a bad one that I'm bringing. Like, wine can be pretty intimidating.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's very much like fashion in that it reflects the buyer, right? So you buy Prada so that you show that you're wearing Prada. It's the same thing with wine. If you show up with a bottle of $2 Chuck, that says something about you. It shouldn't, but it does say something about you as a consumer. And so it creates a lot of anxiety. And when we think about what value we're trying to bring to our customers, it's less so education because we're all graduated. We don't want to go back to school. I don't want to learn anything, but it's confidence. And so having the confidence that people are going to like this product, people are going to like what I picked because I didn't have to pick,
Right.
is a really strong feeling. And to the point you made about dry Riesling, it's you now have the confidence to go buy a dry Riesling because you've had it before. You've been exposed to something that's new. And so confidence, I think, is really, really key, especially for our generation of wine drinkers who are just slowly getting into the industry and are shifting over from White Claws and Bud Lights and maybe the craft beer movement. We're settling down a little bit and we're moving towards wine. And we really want to be the company that helps people gain confidence to make that transition. We'll never make the best Pinot Noir in the world. Costa Brown will take care of that, or some family in France that's been producing Pinot and Burgundy for 7 generations is always going to make a better Pinot Noir than us. But we're going to make damn good Pinot Noir. We've got an excellent winemaker, and he's going to try and make it as representative as possible so that you gain confidence and the ability to say, I like, a fruity Pinot Noir. I like an earthy Pinot Noir.
Yeah, I think you take a lot of the fear out of it, and that's such a strong, unique selling proposition. I want to get into your sales channel and the inside team that you mentioned, but first, I want to
Mm-hmm.
kind of close the loop on my own wine insecurity. Um, I am someone who really likes to put ice in my wine, red or white. I know it's so hillbilly, but I just like cold beverages.
It's not hillbilly. It's much better. Yeah.
Yeah, tell us, is this okay? Can I put
It's
ice in my
completely
wine?
okay. It's completely okay. Put as much ice in your wine as you want. Remember, when a wine is 15% alcohol by volume, that means it's 85% water. So it's already a ton of water. And the only caveat I'll say is that if you're drinking $100 plus bottle of wine, maybe don't put ice in that one. Put that bottle in the fridge and chill it down and drink that one normally. For anything else, it's completely fine to put ice in your wine. I put ice in my red wine all the time. I even ask for it at restaurants because very often restaurants won't keep their wine at the right temperature. Everyone thinks that red wine equals room temperature. That's actually not true, especially in California or in the South where it gets really hot in the summer. You want red wine at like 63 degrees. You want it to be a little cool, and a single ice cube will bring that temperature down just to like the perfect area. But I'm a huge proponent of ice and wine. I'm a huge proponent of jalapenos and rosé. I think wine's a fun product. It's it doesn't need to be so serious. There's a lot of really cool mixologists who are doing great things with wine cocktails that just turn out delicious. And so I don't worry, it's not hillbilly. I do it all the time. Everybody should put ice in wine when they want to chill it down.
Okay, thank you. I already feel lighter. Validated. Thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit about your sales channels and kind of what's next. So you
Mhm.
mentioned that you have 4 direct teams that are focusing on corporate. Are you still in the hospitality space then, or where did that land post pandemic?
So that's actually an interesting update. So we are moving back into the hospitality space. During the pandemic, obviously, it was not really a viable sales channel as hotels were just hunkering down trying to ride it out. As tourism's increased, as hospitality has increased, hotels are now moving back to trying to cater to their customers' needs and be as unique as possible. So we started selling back into hotels in about November. We're in about 50 hotels right now, and are trying to expand very aggressively across the United States. What's been really interesting is how we're selling into those hotels post COVID versus pre COVID. So pre COVID, you would pack up your backpack and your cooler with wine, and you would batch geo the addresses of 15 hotels, and you would hit the road. And you would try and hit 15 cold touch points a day to try and generate some meetings because most of the time, the hospitality person or the wine buyer is not going to be there. So you had to do a lot of manual touch points for a very small result. But every account you can bring on board, they reorder and it starts to snowball a little bit. Post COVID, that entire sales funnel has now turned to an inside sales funnel. So we're now scraping emails and making sure that we're sending out email drips in a more traditional inside sales funnel, and then we're sending them samples of our wine and closing the deal over Zoom. So we're not hitting the road anymore. We're able to really make sure that the clients can get the wine, try the product, and we can hop on Zoom and discuss and do a tasting with them so that they can get the full experience and make their decision. Now, whenever we go out, it's much more targeted. We've already got the meeting set up. We know the whole team's going to be there, and it's a much better use of our time. So we've been a lot more efficient in our ability to sell inside versus going door to door, both on the bottoms up level, but then also from a top down standpoint, talking to some of these corporate chains. Being able to sell remote has been a huge, huge boon for us.
I think that's so smart because I think about going door to door in Los Angeles. It's pretty impossible.
The traffic makes it tough, and where unfortunately it hasn't changed is for like small grocery stores and liquor stores. People who are just entering the alcohol industry as a sales representative, they're still waking up at 4 a.m. and getting all their touch points in before 9 a.m. And so there's still a grind there. But from a hospitality standpoint, they made a huge jump post COVID and modernized and digitized in a really, really effective way.
So you have the hospitality efforts, then you have your direct team who's calling corporations and getting partnership deals. You have obviously direct to consumer. Anyone can go online and buy a tasting kit today, and you all should because it's awesome. But what's next? What other sales channels are you exploring or looking at diversifying?
So the next major channel for us is going to be increasing, really what we call increasing our presence with direct to consumer. Um, there's a couple things that you have to remember when you start a company, and specifically in the wine industry. Wine industry has been around forever. It's one of the oldest physical CPG products in human history, and while it's easy to say as a founder and of a venture backed company, like we're disruptors, we're going in to break up this antiquated old industry. The reality is that the wine industry has actually done a pretty good job of modernizing their business. The first ever subscription business was a wine subscription. It was wineries started that before all the other direct consumer subscriptions started to skyrocket in the late 2000s. Wine had been doing it since the 70s. So they'd already done the subscription model. They've done the owned retail model of opening up these tasting rooms. So now you'll see articles about Allbirds and Warby Parker going from direct consumer to omni-channel. Wine's been omni-channel forever. So finding ways to disrupt an industry that's done an incredibly good job of staying relevant, staying modern, and reaching their customers is a challenge. And the opportunity that we saw, which we're expanding into, is to bring that owned retail concept of the winery tasting room that you visit on a trip to Napa, bring it to the cities and bring it to people's backyards. And so we're going to be opening up tasting rooms across the United States for our wine club members and for our customers, because when you join an online wine club, the only benefits you're getting as a consumer is either cheaper wine, which it's usually not that much cheaper because it's expensive to ship, or you're getting a wine that you love that you can't get in grocery stores. That's basically it. They're sending it to your door. It's actually not that convenient. You have to sign for the package. It takes a week to get there. We're not solving a lot of problems there. When a subscription really solves a problem for a winery is when you live next door to that winery. Because now all those perks of free tastings and cheap bottles and a sense of community are actually accessible. You don't have to fly to San Francisco and drive an hour and a half to Napa and spend $400 on the Motel 6 just to go get your free tasting at the winery you're a member of. That winery is now in your backyard. And so we'll hopefully be starting here in Northern California, expanding to Arizona, and trying to create, essentially take the community aspect and the approachability aspect that we did such a good job of during COVID with our digital tastings and make it more of an in-person physical experience.
I love that, because you also don't have to find a designated driver to drive you to the wineries.
It's the experience that everyone who went abroad to Europe in college and then came back and said, why is wine so expensive here? Why is food so expensive? In Europe, you get great wine for $10 a bottle. The reason is because they're selling direct in Europe and we're selling through distribution in the United States. With our tasting rooms, we're able to sell direct. So we can sell an excellent glass of wine for $8 and everybody's happy because we're selling it direct to consumer. DTC doesn't just mean e-commerce. It means you're selling from the business to the consumer without a middleman. And by doing so, it allows us to lower the prices and make it a lot more affordable while still being able to maintain a healthy margin.
So that's another way that you're really innovating the industry. You're
Yeah.
removing the distribution, because that aren't there all like beverage distribution conglomerates that are just,
Yes,
they own everything.
they do own everything. And I hesitate to say anything bad about them lest I get shot in the night,
Yeah.
because they do stem from the mafia, but they are amazing at scaling a brand. You don't need to use them if you produce a lot of wines. So each tasting room we create will be a winery. We'll be licensed as a producer in each tasting room location. And because we make so many wines from all over the world, we've got a full portfolio that we can offer people. If you only make one or two wines, it's hard to sell. It's hard to open up a tasting room and just say, here are my two wines. Whereas essentially, we're not just disrupting the wine industry, but the wine bar industry as well, where we get to operate and have the same offerings for lower cost to the consumer as all the wine bars in their area with the same expertise, because we're the producer of all these wines.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so everyone wants an In Good Taste tasting room in their backyard. We need one.
Yes.
So when, you and your co-founder are going door to door at the beginning of your journey, what was the first, like, I'd like to learn a little bit about how you prioritized what you delegated, because one of the challenges I see is, you have CEOs and co-founders and they're doing everything. How did you prioritize what to delegate first?
So we played to each other's strengths. At first, we were both doing everything, and very quickly, especially in the early days when it was just Zach and myself, Zach's a better sales guy than I am. And so he was doing more of the door to door, growing the business and selling. I was doing more of the production side of things, making sure we actually had product to fill the orders that he would sell. And that was a big challenge because the easiest way to sell a product is to say yes to whatever the person is asking for. And as a startup, you kind of have to do that. And then the ops team has to scramble to actually fulfill that order. And by ops team, I meant me. So he would go out there and commit us to all these things that I would then have to go figure out how to build and ship to them. But it worked because we were playing to our strengths, and it allowed him to be hyper focused on revenue. It allowed me to be more focused on operations. And then as we started to grow and as we started to look at which roles to hire for, what to delegate, one of the things I learned from our now COO is to really take a couple of hours to think about what are the ankle biters, or what are the things that are preventing you from doing the job that you think you're supposed to be doing. You have to compile all of those and then decide how to remove them from your plate. So if you've got a big problem you need to solve, you need to dedicate hours of thinking, planning, execution to go solve that problem. If you want to go fundraise, you've got to it's an entire sales funnel, right? You've got to go prospect, move people down the funnel, and eventually close them out. And it takes a long time. You're going to talk to 200 people and 3 of them are going to close. So what's blocking you from doing that? Delegate that first. Delegate that first and hire for those roles first so that you can move all the ankle biters off of your plate as quickly as possible. So you can even have the bandwidth to think about how to grow the business, because you can't do both at the same time. And so I started with operations because I was hand bottling a lot of wine. And so
Mm-hmm.
we brought in people to take care of the hand bottling. That allowed me to still spend a little bit of time on operations, but from more of a management level rather than physically doing it. And then slowly build that out, create more time to go fundraise. And then that becomes kind of a cyclical cycle. So you always want to think about your time and how to free up as much of it as possible so that you can focus on the highest priority items.
And eliminate your ankle biters. I love that that is how we're wrapping up this interview. Joe, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed dissecting your business model. I appreciate how transparent you were with us. I know that everyone's going to want to try the wine. So, where can people find In Good Taste?
Right now, ingoodtaste.com is the only place to buy In Good Taste wines, unless you are happen to be staying at some hotels in California, but that's a long list. Go to In Good Taste. We ship to 44 states, and you can buy anything from our winemaker selection to our California wine mixer to our Wild Child collection, which is my personal favorite.
That's what I just ordered, so I can vouch for it. That's Joe Welch on Prospecting on Purpose. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the Prospecting on Purpose podcast. If you loved what you heard today, subscribe to the podcast and please rate and leave a review. For more info on me, or if you'd like to work together, feel free to go to my website, saramurray.com. On social media, I'm usually hanging out at Sara Murray Sales. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.